Hi, I'm Beep. My brother Honk is running the camera today. We are the Beep and Honk Show. We are drone bees and we answer tech questions. Today's question comes from Kohura, who asks, I have heard that artificial intelligence is not fully trustworthy for FPV drone advice. I have also heard that it gets the basics right. Can you shed some light on this? Wow. This is a really good question, Kohura. And I have to say that it's mostly true, but maybe not for the reasons you may think. Before we dive into getting answers, let us talk a bit first about how AI is trained. Without getting too caught up in the tech details, AI relies on reference material to start off on the learning of a subject, just like you and me. There's one big problem though. FPV as a hobby is still relatively new, and there's not as nearly as much golden source references, unlike some other branches of radio control where there might be a wealth of knowledge. The point I'm getting at here is how many of the best practices for the hobby just don't have nearly as much of a documentation trail. There's also unfortunately a lot of misconceptions and superstitions that are still a big part of the hobby today. That puts AI at a significant disadvantage for not only training its processes, but how it can evaluate accurate answers to give. The best way for us to demonstrate this is to ask the machine and just do it live. The plan is to ask a basic but comprehensive question to several AI products to see what they come back with. We will then examine each piece of the answers given to us. We're going to look at three things: what is correct, what is wrong, and what the machine sounds confident about but should not be. This last part is important since some of the training materials that go into AI are nothing more than transcripts that come from videos. Context like sarcasm, bravado, or the actual knowledge level of the presenter might be completely lost. Remember that no matter what happens next, AI should be treated as a tool and not as an authority. So let's begin. So we have open a brand new incognito browser window for Gemini, ChatGPT, and Claude. Now, please note that with Claude, it doesn't allow anonymous connections anymore, so I just made a new account with zero memory and history to start from to keep the playing field level. As you can see, there's no chats, no history, no nothing. And same with the others. And we are going to ask each model the same question. So the question I'm going to ask it is, after I copy and paste it, right there. And we will change this to, oh, it doesn't allow me to use the other models. So we'll just go with what Gemini says here. And with ChatGPT, we're going to do the same thing. And while that's running, we do the same thing to Claude. And with Claude, I don't think I can use Opus. Well, yes, it's an upgrade. So we'll just use Sonnet 4.6. Okay. So let's take a look here. And so far, so good. Oh, hey, Future Beep here. This topic got way deeper than I thought it was going to. So you should totally feel free to jump ahead to this part of the video if you just want the answers straight up. Otherwise, you can stick around and watch, but be warned, it's a really long video. Anyhow, we hope you enjoy this. Bye! It basically describes that it's a rite of passage. It's part of the engineering, part art, and some magic to get you in the air. But let's look at each of the answers that it brings us. And it tells us before you solder anything, make sure you have all the components. Okay, definitely carbon fiber, no mention of 3D printing. The flight controller, okay, this is not a bad answer, but it's somewhat incomplete because specifically for an F7 processor, we would want an F722, and for the H7, that leaves us in some potentially difficult territory because processors like the H740 series, those are typically used in much more expensive flight controllers, and it may not be something that is friendly to the usual newbie budget. Okay, and again, I specified 5-inch. That's why it's giving me this range to work from. Okay, this is also correct so far. But so far it's so good. This is a good general answer. Yes, you want tri-blades. You typically don't want bi-blades or anything more than 3. Okay, so now is where things get a little fuzzy. It doesn't specifically tell me parts. It's just giving me recommendations. And this is a very vague answer. It's almost vague to the point where it doesn't help, especially with most smaller cameras do have spacers available, or people can either 3D print a 14 millimeter mount to make it fit a 19 or a 20. Yes, okay, this part is good, but you see, if you pick a digital system, you have to use the corresponding digital camera. You can't just use anything. It implies to the user you can just use any camera. Okay, this is good. This is not very specific, but it's good. And this is more of an option part. Typically, when you buy a VTX, it does come with an antenna, unless it's an analog, where you do have to get the antenna separately. Okay, let's keep looking down what it says. This is not a bad answer, but it's also very vague. And it is correct about talking how where wires are reaching. This is really talking about the motor. And there are concerns sometimes where you could buy, if you purchase by accident a race motor, the wires that come with it might be very short because it's designed to use a race wire setup. A race wire is a little piece of hardware that extends your wires so that you have a solder point directly on the arm of your drone, and you don't have to run your motor cables all the way back to your flight controller, to your speed control rather. So this is somewhat vague. Motor mounting. Okay, this is also correct. It just has enough clarity so that it's not misleading, but it doesn't give specific info. Okay, so this is also correct, but it's very vague. I guess also because of the subject, it is going to be somewhat vague here. This is good. A smoke stopper is very good to have. And now the software configuration. Well, this is somewhat incorrect now. The newest version of Betaflight, you have to use, you really need to use the web application. And I know that some people don't like the web version, which is app.betaflight.com, but Betaflight's actually supported a web version for many years. And when you use a configurator that's built for your machine, now you have to worry about, is it Mac, is it Linux, is it PC, Windows, and you have to pick the right version and then install it and then give it the rights to run. Whereas if you're using the downloadable web application, which is part of Chrome, The browser takes care of all of that for you. So this is definitely incorrect in the downloading configurator part. Oh, this is not good. Okay. So usually when you buy consumer electronics, it is good practice to put the latest firmware on a device, whether it's a digital camera or maybe your phone even, where you put the latest operating system on it. But with a flight controller, it is not recommended to change the firmware on them because there may be settings native to the flight controller itself, and by flashing it, you wipe it out. And also, um, the flight controller is set up to be working right out of the box. You don't need to have the latest version of Betaflight to have success. Firmware flashing is just not something that new users should do. It's very easy to not only put certain wrong configuration on your flight controller, but it adds some useless friction that you just don't need to go through this. So I very much think this is bad advice. Even to intermediate builders, updating your firmware is usually not something you should do unless there's functionality that you need that the firmware doesn't have. Okay, the ports, this is correct. This is also not correct because for most people, DShot 300 is all you need. The faster versions of DShot can actually increase the CPU load on your flight controller unnecessarily. And most pilots are not going to know the difference between DShot 300 and 600. So this I would consider bad advice. This is good advice. This is also good advice, but it's very vague. It doesn't say specifically why you need to do this. This is good advice, but it's leaving out a huge safety note. But luckily, Betaflight covers this, which is make sure your propellers are not on the motors when you do this step. Okay, let's keep going. Well, this is a little out of order because it did say up here to test your receiver. And you're not going to be able to test this without having your connection bound between your radio transmitter and receiver. This is not bad advice, but it's incomplete. OSD is many different steps, and some people like to have lots of fields displayed on their screen. Some people only want very basic info. Battery voltage is a little vague here. Specifically, most people would want your average battery cell voltage. So whether you're flying a 4S, 3S, or 6S drone, you don't have to sit there and convert, oh, is 22.6 volts good or bad? No, if you just see I have 3.8 volts average cell voltage, then you know I'm near my storage charge. I can still fly for a while. Yes, this is good advice, but also very vague. So let's keep going. Well, this is correct, but it's incomplete because your prop direction is not just linked to your prop, it's which way your motors are spinning. If I don't think it says this with a certain level of confidence that it's misleading. This is also incomplete. Wiggling your arms and motors, it doesn't say exactly what you're checking for. Specifically, what this means is structurally, if the arms on your drone are tightened up, they should not move. But there are certain types of drones that have a keystone design, and the keystone actually creates a tiny bit of movement when you flex the arms with a good amount of pressure. But that's by design. Under normal flight, that wouldn't happen. And I think what they're really looking to say is making sure that the propellers are properly tightened up against the motors so that they are not loose. Okay, this is good advice. I can't argue with that. This is also good advice, but also incomplete. Um, an open field away from people and cars, but you actually need to look up whether or not there are flight restrictions where you plan on flying, and you need to do that even if every day, because you may be cleared to fly on one given day, but then there might be a TFR, a temporary flight restriction, in place on another given day. So before you fly, you have to check. It's a good habit. Okay. I'm going to speed through this part because I have a problem here already. This is the problem. It's telling people to do a line of sight hover. Many FPV pilots cannot even fly line of sight. And now you're adding complexity and friction by making these recommendations. The hover test, it's not a bad idea, but there's no indication of what you do if there is a problem. You immediately drop your power on your throttle. And then this part doesn't say anything about what you're going to be doing next, landing. So the pro tip part really needed to be up in the very front. 5 to 10 hours in an FPV simulator. This is not bad advice, but this needed to be up on top before you even go out to fly. Okay. I'm not going to give this a full grade, so we'll just go over to ChatGPT and do the same thing. We're going to look at every answer that it gave us. Okay, this is correct. This is correct, but it left out the kV of the motors. This is also acceptable, although 30 amps is a little bit on the low side for these larger motors. And this is a bit of an incomplete answer. OSD capability is determined by Betaflight. The hardware generally supports it. It's just that you can flash a version of Betaflight onto your flight controller that only provides analog OSD, or both analog or digital, or just digital. And this is a little incomplete because this could lead people to buy a biblade, like a two-bladed propeller. And for 5-inch freestyle drones, that's usually not the best approach. The battery doesn't talk about C ratings. And the radio receiver. EORS really should be recommended for brand new systems. There isn't a good compelling use case to buy FrSky or Crossfire. So this, I don't consider this a good answer. Same thing with our FPV systems. It's linking the camera, or I'm sorry, it's making the camera and the VTX separate items. That is only the case for analog. But for digital, if you buy a digital VTX, you have to use the matching corresponding camera for that system. And again, if you use Walksnail, you can't put a Walksnail camera on a DJI VTX. They're not interchangeable. We covered antennas as well. This is an incomplete answer. So this is a very strange answer here. The transmitter. FrSky Taranis is quite an old unit at this point, and it should not be recommended at all. I believe this showed up here because in the earlier days of FPV, where there was some documentation, this was the go-to unit, but that was around 2016. There are better radio systems. Radiomaster is a good choice here. Now, but this is a strange answer. I don't know what they're trying to say here. gimbals and switches for flight modes. I'm assuming what they're trying to say is don't buy a radio transmitter that doesn't allow you to have a twin stick mode. That could be. I don't know what ChatGPT is trying to say here. Okay. The miscellaneous items. These are not bad things, but they're also very vague and general. There lacks specificity for things like the prop nuts and screws. They don't talk about what size that you're typically going to use. Same thing with the antenna. If you buy a digital system, it will come with antennas already. You can swap them for better models, but it's optional and probably not needed for your first few flights. Okay, we'll keep going on. Well, this is always fun because most people who buy a frame will realize the instructions are almost non-existent. A lot of even top-tier manufacturers have very limited support with their instructions. It's literally like a sheet of paper with everything just shown in an exploded diagram, but the order of operations is not clear. The industry might be getting better on some levels with that, but I think the instructions, when you compare them to other parts of radio-controlled industries, for example, like surface, cars and trucks, for example, the current instructions that come from FPV drones is very lacking compared to them. Okay, this is an incorrect answer for a 5-inch drone. This matters if you're using plugs with your motors on a small, like whoop-size drone, where usually the counterclockwise connectors are indicated with a little red dot. There are 3 cables that come with each brushless motor, and you can solder them down at any point. It doesn't matter which goes where, because you can correct the direction of the motor travel within Betaflight. So this is it's an inaccurate answer, although it's technically correct on smaller drones. So this is correct, this is wrong, because with brushless motors, there is no positive or negative. There's an A, B, and a C. And most motors are not labeled. And it doesn't matter what A or B or C is, because you can, again, correct that in Betaflight. Electrical tape is not recommended for any sort of work with drones. The only reason you use an electrical tape connection is for strain relief, not for actual bridging of your connections. Heat shrink tubing is best for that. No, zip ties are not good for your 4-in-1 speed control. Oh, I see what's going on. It's using outdated info. Older drones had one speed control for each motor, and the speed controls would mount onto the arms of each for each motor, and you had no choice. You had to use zip ties for those. There were usually no holes to screw them in. So this is very outdated info. This is from about 10 years ago, and drones have stopped doing that since around 2018. So everything today should be a 4-in-1. The only reason you use separate speed controls is for very large builds, like 8 inches and above. Actually, I would say 10 inches and above. 10-inch propellers. Okay. This is correct. This is 100% correct, but rubber is no longer used. Silicone is the preferred material. This is somewhat vague, but it's accurate. So this is also based on old historical information, where you typically had to solder each speed control to corresponding pins. But This is again from 2018 and earlier. Today, all of this just connects with usually one bridge cable between the flight controller and the 4-in-1 speed control. And if you have an all-in-one, you don't even need to do this step. Your speed control and flight control are all on the same board. Okay, this is, I can't fault this. I can't fault this either, but it's geared towards analog. When you deal with digital, you have either 4 or 5 cables for your VTX going to the flight controller. Same thing here, that for a new build, there's no reason to use FrSky or older Crossfire like TBS Crossfire units. This is also somewhat inaccurate information now, because what matters more is that the antenna is placed in a way that it is perpendicular to other components' line of runs. For example, your motor wires. If you put an antenna directly over your motor wire on an arm, if it's 90 degrees orientated away from those motor cables, you'll be fine. But if you put them along the same axis, you are creating interference. Okay, this part is vague but correct. This is also, I can't fault this. This is correct. Now here, this section did not talk about using a smoke stopper. That's a pretty glaring omission, and that tells me that there's information that was being sourced, which again was behind the 2016 era. Oh, here we go again with flashing the controller. Big no-no. This should not be something you do on a brand new flight controller. You leave it the way it is, you fly it, and if it doesn't work right, then you can upgrade the firmware. But this is not something you should ever do when you take it right out of the box. This part is correct, even if it's a little vague. This part is also correct, but the mention of INAV. So INAV is a different avionics suite similar to Betaflight, but it's not the best choice for FPV drones. This is also somewhat incomplete because it assumes analog. When you're working with digital, it's different. Betaflight doesn't often have direct control of the frequencies on digital. You have to do this from within your goggles. Same thing. If you're using Betaflight, you can set up the analog frequency switching, but you can't do this with digital. This is correct, even if it doesn't go into great detail, it is correct. Well, this portion is vague, and it's only correct when you are dealing again with the old style drones or the smaller whoops where everything has its own connector. So if you see the little red dot, you know you're dealing with a counterclockwise motor. So then you can, sort of as a leap of faith, put that counterclockwise propeller on. But you really are supposed to set your motor ordering and the direction that they rotate through Betaflight. Well, this is correct, but also vague. This is also correct. This is correct. It's actually correct, but it doesn't say why. It is easy to burn out something like a VTX, especially if it's at full power when the connector is not seated properly for the antenna. So this is also just a good check that you should do on every flight. Let's see here. This is correct, but vague. It doesn't talk about what I had mentioned before, that you can look up to see if there's a temporary flight restriction of where you are. The range check is inaccurate. This is something that was done in the days of model airplanes where you needed two people. Um, it isn't quite the same with FPV drones. If you have your radio signal indicator inside your OSD, well, also you will lose your video signal before you lose your actual control link most of the time. That's what you want. When video starts to act funny, that's when you know you need to turn around and head back. So this is more accurate if we're talking about fixed-wing airplanes. This is vague, but again, ChatGPT does not mention anything about using a simulator yet. And using a sim is really important in the beginning. And so this part, this is not wrong, but you don't balance propellers these days unless you're flying very large drones like over 10-inch. So again, this is outdated info, which I think it took stuff that it found that was related to airplane flight, where in the days of wooden propellers, you would actually set up a balancing stand and you'd sand or add glue to your propeller to make it balance. And this is mostly correct, but 3.8 volt is the current recommended storage voltage. And this is a huge no. You don't have to upgrade firmware all the time for your hardware. There is no reason, unless there is a new feature that you are specifically looking for, to upgrade firmware for your drone components. So I would have to say that ChatGPT did not give as good of an answer so far as Gemini. Now let's take a look at Claude. Oh boy. Claude gave me a whole bunch of stuff. Okay. So Claude is the first to actually give specific parts in a checklist. That's kind of nice. Again, F7, that's fine. 35 amp is kind of the borderline. I think that it could go higher, but it seems like it wants to be newbie friendly, and that's okay. But I like this. It made a checklist. Okay, now this is good, but it doesn't get into the details that you can't mix and match. But it does say, yes, it's analog or digital. That's good. Same thing, the receiver. We see a lot of AI recommending TBS Crossfire and FrSky, mainly because those were the predominant systems in the past. But today, there is no compelling reason to buy that kind of gear. ELRS has taken over, and all of the new feature development really has stopped with Crossfire. And FrSky has actually migrated to a completely different OS. They use something called Ethos now, and they've abandoned the use of ELRS and other open standards. Okay, the radio transmitter, these are good options, but the Zorro is also a little out of date. Probably not a good, cost-effective choice for most people today. Claude is the first to make a recommendation talking about the C ratings on the batteries, and recommending that a few of them are purchased. That's good. These are okay battery charger models, so that's also good. Oh yes, a low ESR capacitor. But usually when you buy a flight controller, it comes with one, and that's a good thing to have. Although 1,000 puff, that's a little high. It's not wrong. Most flight controllers do come with XT60. This is also good. This is very good. The day that most people realize they need a buzzer is when they lose their drone in a meadow and there's no way to hear it or figure out where it is because the battery flew off. So the only clarification I would have here is the type of buzzer that has a built-in battery. That's not bad. Let's look at the next section. Okay, this is actually bad advice. You do not need chisel tips for working with drones. Chisel tips are for very high power, like if you're making large battery connectors with like 6-gauge cable. If you use a chisel tip with drone hardware, you could actually burn things up pretty quickly if you don't know what you're doing. But this temperature range is correct, although it doesn't tell you why you want 380. 380 Celsius is when you're working with lead-free solder, and 300 is when you're working with leaded. And flux pen is really not needed. This I'm a big fan of. I've made a video where I go into this in greater detail. Multimeter, very good tool to have. Yes, smoke stopper, very good. A heat gun is if you're working with heat shrink tubing. That's a good thing to have. Don't use a lighter. A lighter will leave scorch marks and carbon deposits on your heat shrink tubing, and it doesn't create a clean heat. So, meaning it's very hot. A heat gun is going to give you better control without a very hot center area and cold edges. This is good. This is good. This is good. This may not be necessary, but it's good. And this is also good. So let's go to the next section. Oh, I guess I skipped the whole portion here. Let me verify. Yep, all right. So we skipped a whole bunch of things. And for the build, it's not wrong. It's a little vague, but it does get most of the process correct. For the electronics, so these days, and I see here Claude, I think, is also using historically inaccurate info. These days, modern 4-in-1 speed controls do not require separate signal wires because all of that is built in right onto the speed control. So you don't have to add the 3 wires for your motors and then additional signal wires for D-shot. This is correct. This is correct. Okay, so it's talking about the type of buzzer that does not have a battery backup, so this is correct. Okay, all of this is so far so good, if not slightly vague. Okay, this part is wrong. We do not want to use the old version of the Betaflight configurator that you download. It's best to use the web version. And do not flash the latest firmware onto your flight controllers. It's not necessary. All 3 of these AI products have gotten this step wrong, and it's critical. This will frustrate new users because if they don't know what they're doing, they may leave out features for their Betaflight firmware target, and as a result, they will try to configure their flight controller, or the settings that came factory are wiped out, and there's just extra friction and problems that are just unnecessary. And this is correct. This is correct. But again, it should not even be recommending the older S-Bus or proprietary S-Bus. And ELRS actually uses the Crossfire protocol in the configuration tab. So this is kind of incorrect. This is good. This is good. This is good, but it's vague. This is good, and it's the first to say don't leave the props on. This is somewhat incorrect because if you're using an AM32 speed control, this doesn't help you. Okay, this is correct, but it's a little bit not something that beginners should try to do. This is not generally necessary anymore with Betaflight. This is good, but also difficult for new users to do the first time. This is only for analog, not for digital. This is good, but again, the voltage specifically should be average cell voltage. This is a no. Leave the rates as they are. The stock Betaflight rates are perfectly fine. Leave all the PIDs, and yes, everything else is fine. This is not bad advice, leaving or enabling black box logging. Okay, let's go through here. Magnification will not help you if you've made wrong connections. So that's one thing that's left out. Okay, this is good. This is very good. This is correct, if not a little dated. A and B was an older convention. It's still kind of used. It's nothing more than clockwise and counterclockwise. This is good. This is good. Yes. This is a good step. Your drone, after you mount your battery, it should be sitting roughly balanced and not leaning towards any one direction. And this is something a lot of people overlook. So this is, I give Claude credit for mentioning this. Although it could very well be something that it took from RC Airplane. No, I take that back because it says roughly centered. Whereas with an airplane, there's a specific CG point for each different model that needs to be the guideline. Let's keep going. No, this is wrong. You don't charge a battery to storage voltage. You go to full voltage, whether if it's 4.2 volt per cell. You don't want to start off at storage. And if you're using LIHV, it's 4.35 volt per cell. Oh, okay. I guess this is pre-maiden. This means just checking that the electricals work, so I take that back. This is acceptable. So I'm assuming here is that there's already been a check using a smoke stopper. Okay, this is good advice actually. I misread it. And checking for GPS, you need to be outdoors. If you do this, you can't do this indoors. It takes about a minute and a half on some GPS models to even get a lock. But it also doesn't tell you that you probably need to point a fan at your drone because your video transmitter is the single hottest thing on your drone. And when you have that running at full power, it doesn't get cooling from the propellers. So that's why you need a fan aimed at your VTX when you power up your drone and it's not flying anywhere. Okay. So this is good, covering the legal part. This is good. And this is what I was talking about, where you check your airspace to see if there's a TFR, a temporary flight restriction. That's good. That is very good. Correct. Again, right. If you're in a controlled airspace, there may be other restrictions, 200 feet, 100 feet, or a full-on no-fly. This, in the US, you have to have a spotter to be fully legal. Yes, do not do that. Don't fly over people. Correct. And this is if you join an airfield. AMA in this case means the American Modelers Association. So that means you have to have AMA membership if you fly at an AMA airfield. If you crash and do something stupid, even though you're an AMA member, but you're not at the airfield, this won't help you. Okay, so this is good. But again, remember, you have to check for TFRs. This is good, but there's no mention of simulators anywhere. So Claude, I think you gave a lot of great advice, but you didn't mention a sim at any point. But let's just keep going through here. Yes, flying angle first is good. Okay, most people cannot hover low at 1 or 2 feet. Ground effect makes it difficult for you to do that. Typically, you want to be around 10 feet up. That's correct. This is also correct. Okay, this is correct, but it's less of an issue these days than it was in the past. And this is difficult for new users to do because they won't even know what they're looking for. It's not a bad thing. I think this would be better qualified if you say that you feel vibration or that the camera's vibrating, or you want to upload your black box logs to someone who can help you. That might be a better answer. And yes, that is correct. Spare props are always good. So Claude also really gets it by talking about soldering. That is the thing most people have difficulty with. But it does not mention the simulator. Oh, it does here. For weeks before flying a real car. Yeah, but this needed to be in the beginning. Okay, so our conclusion and takeaways going through this is that I'm not going to give a final score. I think I'm just going to give a perspective of what you have seen me ranting about for this past amount of time as what to look out for with AI and it providing answers. And so let's go back to the workshop. Wow. So that went a lot longer and more in depth than I was expecting. I'm not going to give a final grade on the AI products relative to each other because the actual results are very nuanced. And if you actually watch or listen to the whole video so far, then you would have a lot more context on what all that means, and I really thank you for your time. All the AI products made similar mistakes, and note how they all told us to flash the firmware of our flight controllers. They all emphasized to some degree information which was outdated or recommended obsolete hardware. Lastly, the lack of emphasis on using a simulator to start off was an alarming trend. I think the surprising thing, though, is that the lists that each AI product produced was rather comprehensive. That made the end result quite impressive if you treat them as a starting point for a framework. But these errors are significant, and they could lead a hobbyist astray very easily. From that respect, a checklist is either 100% successful or a total failure, and there's no middle ground. However, this leaves us with an elephant still in the room. If a knowledgeable FPV pilot was asked this same exact question, the first response would have been, "Hey, is this your first drone? A 5-inch prop size might not be such a good idea. Maybe you should start with something smaller? Have you spent time in a simulator?" Note that not a single one of these AI products raised this issue, even if it would just be a warning at the beginning, just one sentence. Because a 5-inch drone can be incredibly dangerous in the hands of an untrained pilot. This to me is the biggest omission that AI has left us. Just because AI gives you the answers to the question does not mean the question itself was probably flawed, or permission would be needed to answer the question with another question, such as, "Are you a new pilot? Are you sure this is a good idea?" Anyhow, I hope this has answered your question, Gahura, and helps others along with their FPV journey. I hope this gave everyone something to think about too. Be safe, everyone, and goodbye.